Hello, 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 and welcome to Inner Work for Greater Good. Sorry, the microphone got caught. Inner Work for Greater Good. My name is Emily Eldridge. I am the creator, the founder of Change Light and the creator of the Change Light system. The whole purpose of this is to empower you to do inner work that accelerates your ability to make a difference in the world, because inner work is, in my opinion, it's everything. Outer work is extremely important, but as I often say, let your doing come from your knowing of your being, come from your being. So when you do that inner work to know who you truly are and who you're here to be, then whatever outer work you end up doing is because you feel called to do it, because it feels in alignment with your truth, because it really is the highest way to make the most positive difference when you're truly aligned with your truth and knowing yourself and all of your strengths and healing all of your weaknesses or any blocks, triggers, etc. that pop up. So anyway, if you're new to the show, welcome, welcome. If you're not, welcome again. I'm so glad you're here. This is actually a new environment. If you've seen the past few episodes, I think I mentioned that I'm moving. My husband's moving to New York at the end of May. This is early May right now in 2022. And so moved into the new apartment. So I literally just hung these items today, still figuring out my background. But anyway, this is real life, people. So today I want to talk about, the title is, who would you be without your blank? So the reason why I left that blank is because I think it's important that rather than me throwing in words in there, you can figure out what those words are for yourself. But it's the whole idea of how we tend to identify with certain aspects of ourselves that may not be the most positive or helpful aspects of ourselves. So let me be a little more clear. So here's how I interpret that. Who would you be, or who would I be? Who would you be without your inner struggles? Who would you be without your pain? Who would you be without particular wounds that you've been carrying for a long time? Who would you be without certain triggers? And this is a really, really important thing to consider, because a lot of times we don't realize how much we unconsciously identify with certain parts of us, with certain, as I would call them, X powers. So if you're familiar with the X powers, then you know what I'm talking about. If you're not, go ahead and watch those videos. There are lots of good information about our X powers, which are those parts of us with which we struggle, that feel like they get in the way of our power, that they get in the way of our ability to fully be who we are and who we know we can be. And so what happens is, especially if we've been living with a particular wound or a particular belief or a particular reaction or a particular emotional set point or state, or just a sort of inner state of being or feeling, that we can become very, very identified with that. So for example, if we tend to feel angry a lot, we may think of ourselves as an angry person. Or if we tend to feel depressed a lot, we think of ourselves as a depressed person, or we unconsciously become identified with depression. And we can't imagine ourselves without it. And here's the funny thing, is that a lot of times it can be the very thing that we're trying to get rid of, that we're trying to, release. And yet we find it can be so hard to release, often because we are unconsciously identified with that part of us, and we form certain attachments to that part of us, or we feel that other people see us a certain way, and therefore if we were to suddenly not be that way, that could mean that other people might start to treat us differently or feel differently towards us, or may feel that their role starts to change in relation to us, and it might unsettle certain patterns, certain family systems, certain ways of being, certain relationships that can really unsettle some of those things. And so that's why it's really important to be really, really honest with ourselves about what it is with which we are consciously and unconsciously identified. As usual, this topic comes from work I've done with a client this past week. And so this past week, and this happens all the time, quite frankly, that when I start to work with an X power inside of someone, when I start to work with a part of an inner struggle that they've carried for a long time, it could be some episode or pattern of abuse that they experienced, and they've got a part or parts of them that have been carrying that. It could be some trauma, some deep wounds from childhood, and so that's become such a sort of feels like such an integral part of them, that not only do they have trouble releasing that part or helping that part heal, but also that part tends to be like, but this is who I am, and why are you taking away my identity? And there are a bunch of really key reasons why this is the case. And so, as I talked about, that basically we tend to unconsciously resist releasing certain emotional set points or habits or patterns or triggers or wounds or whatever, because we are so identified, because it feels like, well, it's always been this way, or I've always felt this way, or this abuse happened when I was so young, but I don't remember who I was before that. The reality is, you're not your pain. You're not your fear. You're not your struggles. You're not your wounds. You're not all of these things. And neither am I. I mean, I'm not just talking to you. It's the same for me too. It's that we are not those things that we may unconsciously identify with. So we may be wounded, but it doesn't mean we are that wound. That wound or that episode or what have you is something that happened to us. That emotion is something we feel. But just because I may be angry, and I may be angry a lot, does not mean I am an angry person. It just means that I feel a lot of anger. Well, that anger comes from somewhere, as we often talk about on this show. It comes from some serious or series of experiences or an experience that's causing that emotion to get triggered in this moment now. Or for example, with anger, I think I've talked about that a lot of times it can be because we're giving away our power, or we're allowing other people to violate our boundaries. And that's why that anger comes up. So that emotion can be really, really good information, but it doesn't mean that therefore you are that emotion, or I am that emotion. We are not. Oftentimes, the term is that emotions are energy in motion. So it's not as though it's just energy that's supposed to just stay this way. It's also meant to move. It's meant to flow. So I want to talk about why it is that we can tend to be so attached. I did talk a little bit about this, but let's also now talk for more of an ex-powers perspective, because what happened was, I'm sorry, I sort of cut myself off my own story, but I worked with a gentleman this week. And in our session, basically, it was when I asked him, again, this happens a lot, when they'll say, he said that he, felt this, constant negativity, constant hopelessness, constant sense of there's no point, it's useless, it's never going to work. And even though he himself is extremely positive and hopeful, this part of him would kept pulling him back, kept pulling him back, kept pulling him down, and kept reminding him of all the times when he failed before. Can you identify with this? I wouldn't be surprised if you can, because a lot of us I have had these. I'm not aware of having these parts of me anymore, but it's because I've healed over the years, many, many of these parts. And so a part like that exists for a reason. In his case, it was a wounded. Sometimes it can actually come from an inner critic place where it's telling you that, no, you've already failed all these other times, and so it's never going to work, etc. And in this case, I would say that this particular ex-power, well, let me back up. He said that he tends to feel that way. So I said, well, who is it that's saying that? Okay. And what I do, that sometimes I'll ask that question because it's a way of saying, like, who inside of you, meaning it's not you, it's a part of you. But rather than recognize that it was a part of him, he said, well, it's me saying that. And this happens a lot. Again, because it's been such a pervasive, such a persistent presence inside of him, he'd become unconsciously identified with it and saw himself as this hopeless, sad, etc. But as we discovered, it wasn't him speaking, it was actually a part of him. And so we identified that there was this part of him that was very, very down, very, very low, very sad, in a dark place, of course, and feeling like it was useless, that there was no point in trying. because if he tried to get out of this dark place, he was going to get whacked, he was going to get hurt. He, you know, that he wasn't going to get anywhere. So this part of him had basically learned a long time ago that it's useless, that's hopeless. Now, if you're familiar with the X power types, you'll know this is a wounded. At the same time, though, this wounded had some controller aspects to it, which can happen sometimes with woundeds. That it thinks that this one thought that by pulling him down and holding him back, that he was protecting him from getting too high or joyful or happy, because what happens if you risk that? You risk, you know, it's like the higher you go, the farther you fall. And so a lot of times we can have these parts of us that that's their attitude, and therefore that's what they're trying to do. But again, he had been so identified with this that he thought it was just him. It wasn't, it was a part of him. And so what we learned with this part of him, well, let me just say that this is very classic for a lot of X powers, especially the ones that have been with us for a long time, and especially the ones that are very, and most X powers are pretty committed to like their point of view. But this guy, this part of him was really extremely committed to his point of view. And there are actually other reasons for that in this situation, and this can happen sometimes in the X power dynamics between our X powers and ourselves, is that if we are deeply resistant in fighting against that part of us is going to hold on to its position, and it's going to be like, no, I'm right. I've talked before about the physics of emotion, is that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. If for every emotion that comes, you know, if we tend to push down on it, it's just going to push back up. And so that's what perpetuates this whole situation of like this part of us holding on to its identity and holding on to its perspective. If it feels like we're resisting it or we're fighting it, it's just going to stay entrenched. So that can be one reason why a part of us, why an X power can hold so determinedly onto its position and its point of view, which even in our deepest desire, you know, especially if we're trying to get rid of it, that's automatically putting a kind of resistance on that part, which means it's going to fight back, because it's like, I don't want you to get rid of me. I want you to listen to me. I want you to honor what I'm saying. I want you to hear me. Sure enough, that's what this part was telling him. He's like, I feel this way for a reason. Actually was saying this. I feel this way for a reason, and you're not listening to me. And you keep pushing me down, and you keep kicking me and whacking me, metaphorically, internally, of course. And he's like, but I am here for a reason. And I don't want you to fight with me. I want you to listen to me. And I want you to hear that, you know, I remember all of that pain that we went through. I remember all of those wounds. And so that's what this part was trying to do. And that's oftentimes what these parts of us will keep trying to do. So even though we may say, well, I want to get rid of it, you're not going to get rid of it. It has its own story to tell. It has its own emotional perspective. It has its reason for being. So that kind of entrenchment that comes from that inner resistance can be a big reason why it's so hard for us to let go of these identities, because basic, unconscious or conscious, because these parts of us are holding on to that identity. And the more we resist it, the more it's just going to fight back. So that's a big reason. Another one is that oftentimes that part doesn't remember the way it used to be. It could have formed so early in life, so early in our childhoods, that it just doesn't have the conscious memory of, you know, what its original essence was, you know, like how it felt to be joyful, or what it was like to actually feel some amount of hope, and or even to think positive thoughts. That was the case for this part within this man, is that it was so like, I don't know, I can't imagine, you know, you want me to be more positive? Like, what is that like? I have no idea, because it had felt this way for so long that it had forgotten that. And so it forgets how it forgot its original essence. It's been distorted for so long that it's basically just thinks that, well, this is who I am. As I said, though, it's not your, let's put it this way, with that part, it's hopelessness, it's sadness. That's not who it is ultimately. And I've seen this across the board when I work with parts, and I work with X powers, is that even when someone thinks that their inner child is dead, it's like, no, it's in there. So that joy is there, that light is there. Anything that's inside of us that feels dark, that is a part of us, it's just because it's a part of our light that has fallen into darkness. So what does that mean? Bring it out of the darkness, bring it back to the light and back to its original essence. So that part may think that no, there's no other way of being, but that's not true. It is of the light. It comes from the light. And one of the things I did in this session with this gentleman's part, X Power, is I reflected back the light that I saw inside of it, and what a beautiful purpose that I saw it was serving for the man, and what a difference I saw it was making in the wisdom that it was sharing. And it was just like, thank you so much. I really appreciate hearing that. And it gradually softened and it gradually relaxed because it felt heard, it felt validated. And it gradually started to see like, oh, there is actually light around me. There's holes in this darkness of, light coming through. So this is part of it. Also, another big reason, and this is probably the most common reason that I run into when it comes to X powers and why they become so deeply attached to their role and why they're so resistant to letting go. It's because they feel they are serving a purpose for you or for the person. So an X power feels like it's doing a job. It's serving a purpose. And so it's very identified with this. Well, this is my job. This is what I do. And that its intentions are always good. As I've said before about X powers, every X power's intention is for you is good or for itself. It is trying to protect you or itself, whatever way it knows. So the whatever way it knows is a key part of that, because whatever it's doing, you may look at what it's doing and be like, oh, hell no, that is not protective. That is painful. That is hurtful, and it doesn't work for me. However, it thinks it's being protective. It thinks it's protecting you. It thinks it's protecting itself. It thinks that maybe it's actually, helping you to feel better or protecting you from criticism or protecting you from disappointment, which is a lot of what this part was doing inside of the man. It's like, well, if I keep reminding you to stay down, then you're not going to get your hopes up and then get disappointed. So it thinks it's serving a purpose. And at one point, it was serving a purpose for you. It was actually having some kind of results that maybe were necessary at some periods of your life. But the fact that you struggle with it means it's not working anymore. It's actually hurting you. It's not helping you. And so the thing is, that part though has to come, that X power needs to come to understand that what it's doing actually isn't working anymore, that it's actually hurting you and not helping you, or it's hurting both of you. It's hurting itself by holding on to that pain. So that, it's kind of like one analogies I give, the stories that I kind of tell in my unpublished book is I talk about, I sort of use this example of, imagine if you've got a guy who, was built, he's had his job since the 1900s, 1800s, back when we had horse-drawn carriages, right? And so if you have horse-drawn carriages, what do you need? You need horses. What do the horses need? One of the things they need are horseshoes. And, horse-drawn carriages were our form of transportation for many centuries. But, suddenly there's this thing called a car, the automobile, and automobiles don't need horseshoes. And so more people are buying cars. And so that means you need fewer horse-drawn carriages, which mean that you need fewer horseshoes for horses, because you don't need as many horses, carting us around. And so imagine there's someone who that's what he's been doing his whole life. He's been making horseshoes and he's really good at it. And he's really making a big difference, or he was for a while. And that factory was really pumping and he felt such a sense of connection and usefulness, and it brought home the bacon for his family. And he had a real sense of identity. Well, what happens if you suddenly say, oh, sorry, dude, we don't need horseshoes anymore. You're out of a job. And he's like, but imagine his reaction. He'd be like, but this is all I know how to do. But no, we have to keep making horseshoes because, people still need horseshoes. So he's still making horseshoes. And then meanwhile, the factory shut down because there's not enough business and everyone's kind of moved away, but he's still there making horseshoes. And you'd be like, that's just crazy. We don't need you to do that anymore, buddy. I'd really actually rather you come help us out over here, you got great mechanical skills. Could you come help us with this? No, this is what I do. This is who I am. He's derived some identity from it. He's derived some positive emotions in the past from it and a sense of purpose. And so imagine that it's like your X powers are like that. It's like they're parts of you that have felt a sense of purpose and felt a sense of mission or felt a sense of identity, but also felt a sense of connection, which is really what the key is for. This is the core of it here. To feel a sense of connection with you from having done that job. So it might be a part of you that's an inner critic, an ex-power who's criticizing you. And you're kind of going, dude, I don't need you to criticize me. And no, but this works. And I have to keep doing this because it's protecting you from this. It's that sense of like connection and identification and like commitment to that job. But here's the other thing that often happens with ex-powers is that they're afraid of being rendered obsolete, because what could happen, what are they afraid will happen if they're rendered obsolete? They won't have a job anymore. They'll disappear. They'll no longer exist. You won't need them. And then they'll be disconnected from you. They'll lose connection with you. When ultimately their true essence is to be in connection with you. They're a part of you. It's another big reason why you can't get rid of these things. Why this guy was at war with this part of him, because you can't get rid of a part of you. It's a part of you. But it doesn't mean you have to accept it the way it is doing its old job. It doesn't mean that just because all this guy knows is how to make horseshoes, that you should have him come to your automobile factory and keep making horseshoes. No, really wouldn't make sense, right? He'd just be making piles of horseshoes and you'd be like, ain't got no horses here for the horseshoes, So it's a matter of going, you've got great skills. I see what you really are here to do and what you're so good at. So let's just help you find another way of doing that. We don't want to ever banish an ex-power or banish a part. We can't. And I often have to reassure that, but it's okay. I'm not trying to send you away. We can't send you away. You're a vital part of this person. So let's figure out a way that you can really love and support them going forward in a way that feels good for them and feels good for you. So it's a matter of helping that part understand that it's not going to lose connection. If anything, it's going to be more connected because it won't be at odds. So all you're doing is just helping it find a new identity and a new purpose and job that serves you and supports you rather than holds you back. But my whole point is that from an ex-power perspective, this is one of the big reasons why when we are on this journey of inner work and we're trying to be free of some part of us, that it can be especially hard because those parts are so tied to whatever it is they've been doing for so long. So this idea of who would I be without this fear, this struggle, this pain, sometimes it can be like, there can be parts of us that absolutely do see that clearly and go, I totally see who I could be without this. But there could be other parts of us that when we actually start to work with them, that, or even maybe we can feel that good stuff and then still feel there's this part of us that's pulling us back. It's often because there's that deeper fear of it losing its sense of purpose and power and connection with you. And it might even be like, who would I be? Who would I be without this pain? All I've ever known is this pain. And the truth is, as I said, that it is not, its reality is not the pain. The pain is something that it feels, it experienced because you experienced something that was painful. Its wound is something that it carries because you were wounded. It's, whether it's depression, it's anger or whatever, any of those things, it's often because it's carrying that. It was temporarily distorted by it's that experience, but that's not permanent. Just as, remember I said, just because it's in darkness does not mean that that is its natural state, that is its core purpose or being. that actually it's just a part of your light that's fallen into darkness. But what happens when you shine the light in the darkness? Darkness disappears, the darkness dissipates because we've shown a light. What happens when we bring something out of the closet and into the light? Well, it's now light, it's covered in light. So that's all this is, and it can rediscover its true self and help you to really connect with the truth of who you are, which is not your pain, which is not your wounds, which is not your fears, which is not all those things that you may think you are, or you may think is a permanent part of you and you'll never get over it. I will tell you this, that I've discovered that there are certain parts of me that on the one hand, I was like, oh, I wish I could stop being this way, or stop feeling this way, or oh, stop reacting this way. And indeed, like I've undone tons of those things. But there's also certain aspects of it. Like, for example, I'm a very random type thinker. I can be a sequential thinker, but I really love being more random. And so what I found is it's not that there are ways of healing parts so that you become more of your true essence. So for me, if we're talking about the random type thinking, when my random, that's the way my brain is designed. I'm a random type thinker. That's why I'm good with emotions and I'm good with inventing things. So for me, being a random type thinker, but then impacted by the wounds and the fears and the sadness and the anger and all these other emotional things, that actually made that random type more erratic. So what happened for me was, as I started healing all of the emotional stuff, it calmed that random type thinking down so that I can use it more as a tool, and I embrace it more as a key part of my brilliance, my genius, just as you have aspects the way you're designed. But in other words, it's about healing and releasing those parts, all that stuff that gets in the way of fully embracing your genius, your brilliance, your unique wiring of your brain, your intuitiveness, your unique way of seeing things. I just want to throw that little caveat in there to say that it's not about like we all just release all this pain and then we all just become these sort of neutral blobs. It's like, no, it actually frees the truth of who you are. And also I've discovered that there have been so many parts of me that I've resisted that turns out are really just, ultimately is what X powers are, right? They're transformed N powers. But really it's a matter of the more you turn towards and the more I've turned towards and the more I've embraced those parts, it's like the more they calm down and then use them for the best effect. So it's all about embracing who you are, but recognizing that it can be hard to release these parts of us that we're so identified with because we think that's who we are. And so I want to really emphasize here, I want you to imagine, even if it sounds crazy, even if it sounds completely out of reach, I want you to stop for a minute and notice, first of all, and a lot of it's subconscious, but first of all, notice, what is it that you are identified with? What is it? What parts of you? What emotional reactivity? What wounds are you carrying? What fears, etc.? What is it that you're carrying that you suddenly go, I'm so identified with this. Like, I think this is who I am. But what if it's not? What if that's not who I am? What if my true state is something else? Or what if whether it could be a fear, but it could be that fear is simply an over-energized or distorted, kind of like a part of you that's been distorted to come across as fear. But really it's this incredible superpower that you've been interpreting as fear, or that has been affected by fear. But if it were to calm down and flow with you and be aligned with your truth, if it could really empower you, I want you to think about what am I identified with? What am I unconsciously thinking is me, but maybe really isn't me? But then also, and then secondarily, who would I be without that fear? Who would I be without this sadness? Who would I be without this wound? That's not to say you wouldn't have the memory of the wound happening, but that the sting, the emotional sting, could be gone. Who would you be without your struggle, without your stories that you're telling yourself? This comes a lot also, I should say, from Byron Katie. Who would you be without your story? What are the stories you're telling yourself? What are the identifications, the identities that you carry? That what if you weren't those things? Who are you at your true essence? And I would say you're light. And I don't want to put words. I shouldn't do this with words, but I just want you to consider the lightness and the joy and the peace and the clarity and the wisdom that exist beyond, through and beyond all of those identities, all of those limiting beliefs or identities that you might be carrying. Okay? Oh, as always, covered a lot. So I hope this has been helpful for you. And as always, check me out, go to the website, www.changelight.world, and join our community. Take the course. I teach all the techniques for drawing out and releasing all of this emotional stuff. It's this very sophisticated, deep form of parts work that works really, really, really fast. So I really invite you to be a part of this journey with us. In the meantime, thank you very much, and I will see you next week.